The way of the higher evolution has also its two phases, as has the lighted way. In the early stages of the unfoldment of the Christ consciousness, and in the attainment of the third initiation, the transfiguration, the aspirant and the initiate disciple pass along the first part of the path of discipleship. In the treading of the way of the higher evolution, for which we have as yet only this somewhat cumbersome name, the initiate disciple treads the way of Antakarana and the way of the higher initiations. In making this statement, I would again remind you that the third initiation is regarded by the hierarchy as the first major initiation, whilst the two previous initiations are considered as only preparatory in their nature. The training given in preparation for them, and the consequent expansions of consciousness, reveal to the initiate the nature of the soul, the scope, widespread and universal, of the divine consciousness, and his relation to the Father, the monad. They enable him to become the soul in manifestation to such an extent that his awareness is definitely and unalterably that of the soul. At the fourth initiation, the soul body, the causal body, is no longer needed, and then it disappears, dissipates, and is entirely destroyed, thus leaving the initiate free to tread the way of the higher evolution and to follow in the footsteps of the Christ. He was the first of our planetary humanity to blaze the trail. Is not that phrase much used to the higher spheres of revelation? I would here also remind you that during this stage of human evolution, all these various phases exist simultaneously. This largely accounts for the relative differences and difficulties which characterize all the religions of the world and all relationships. Emotional appeal is needed by the masses, and their goal, some way ahead, is soul consciousness and soul control. It is the mystical way and the way of the early and preparatory stages of the science of invocation and evocation. It is the method to be followed by average humanity at this time, because men are largely Atlantean in their approach and their natures. They must learn to tread the path by becoming the path itself, and in this way develop the mechanism and the capacities which are inherent in the divine mind, which spins the thread of connecting light and relates all beings within the planetary ring past knot into itself. By becoming the path, symbolically speaking, and by a process of reorientation, the aspirant who is seeking to tread the lighted way of purification and of discipleship reaches a point where that light and that path have brought him to a specific goal. Then the light which he has generated from within himself and is learning rapidly to use reveals to him the way of the higher evolution, the fact of a still greater goal further on ahead, called by the Christ the Father's house. At the fourth initiation, he becomes aware for the first time in his experience that there is a hiatus or gap separating him from the distant goal, rather from his distant goal. This constituted the major part of the agony upon the cross. There was a fusion of agonies at that supreme moment, if I might attempt to express what occurred. The Master Jesus, crucified there, felt the agony of human need and renounced his own life and gave his all, again symbolically speaking, to meet that need. The Christ, at that time overshadowing his great disciple, also passed simultaneously through a great initiatory experience. The agony of his yearning for revelation and increased enlightenment in order to enhance his equipment as world savior revealed to him the new possibilities from which, when confronted with them dimly in the Garden of Gethsemane and later upon the cross, his whole nature shrank. Great as is this mystery to you, and impossible as it is for you to comprehend that whereof I speak, it is wise to establish the fact of your consciousness that at the crucifixion initiation, the Master Jesus took the fourth initiation, and the Christ took the sixth initiation. The Master Jesus reached the culminating experience of the lighted way, whilst the Christ made that final effort which enabled him entirely to complete and traverse the rainbow bridge and to go to the Father, as he told his disciples, thus moving forward onto the first stage of the way of the higher evolution. The practical point for aspirants and disciples to remember is that the science of invocation and evocation entered a new phase when Christ came and presented himself before humanity. He then gave the teaching which summarized all the past and indicated the new aspects of the future teaching. He opened the door to the way of the higher evolution, hitherto closed, just as the Buddha epitomized in himself the achievements of the lighted way and the attainment of all knowledge and wisdom. Christ, in opening this greater door beyond the lesser door, anchored, if I may so inadequately express it, the will of God on earth, particularly in relation to the consciousness of men. He lifted the entire science of invocation and evocation to the mental plane and made possible a new approach to divinity. It is difficult to give you a symbol which could clarify this matter in your mind, but the one given may carry some enlightenment. It must be remembered that intelligence and love were present upon earth, the first in greater degree than the second, and that the task of all the great world saviors, emerging from the secret place, from the illimitable past until the present time, has been to anchor, organize, and implement these divine aspects, energies, attributes, and to further their development within the body of the planetary logos. They also, from time to time, demonstrated to the humanity of their period of appearing the point in that development which has been reached. These representatives of deity have been all grades, degrees, and differing points of spiritual unfoldment. They have been chosen for their aptitude to respond to invocation, to manifest certain divine qualities, to attract around themselves those who had latent the same divine qualities, and who could therefore step down the teaching that the world Savior came to give, and translate into human equivalents as much of the divine inspiration as was possible. Many of them have been forgotten, even if their work was successful. Others have been resolved into myths by the thought form-making faculty of man, but their work is still thereby remembered, and to this, monuments and tradition constantly testify. Greater sons of God possess the potency and a love of humanity which, even at the close of many centuries, evokes the attention of mankind and conditions even yet the reactions of millions of people. Vyasa, the original Vyasa, who was the great individuality evoked by the invocation of the early animal men, is still more than just a name. Even though he has passed out of our planetary scheme millions of years ago, he opened a door into the human kingdom through his response to the animal kingdom and its higher invocative ranks. His work brought about the process known as individualization. Down through the ages, these sons of God have come evoked by human invocation. In their turn, they have invoked certain aspects of the divine nature deeply hidden in mankind, all related hitherto to consciousness and to responsiveness of the part to the whole. Eventually, Hercules came forth and opened the door on the path of discipleship, his work being preserved for us in the 12 labors of Hercules. These epitomize the various tests to which all disciples are subjected prior to the various initiations. Sri Krishna came and opened the door through which mankind could pass to the second initiation. The Buddha, a still greater figure, the one who is known as the Enlightened One, also came and demonstrated to humanity the nature of the lighted way, its revelations, and its effects in consciousness. He enacted for us the supreme achievements of the mystical way. Then came the Christ and performed a triple work. First, he opened the door to the third initiation. Second, he anchored on earth the will of God in the matrix of love, as it has been esoterically called. And third, he pointed the way through the needle's eye, which gives entrance to the passage through the pyramid, the symbol of the spiritual triad in this case, which leads out onto the way which terminates in Shambhala. His work was of a major consummating nature. He demonstrated in himself two divine aspects, thus giving shape and substance to love. This had been sequentially fostered by several preceding lesser world saviors, of whom Sri Krishna was the greatest. The Christ completed the work of the Buddha by manifesting in its fullness the nature of love, thus permitting the full expression of love wisdom in its dual aspect, the one aspect demonstrated by the Buddha and the other by the Christ. But his greatest work has not yet been emphasized in the worlds of thought and of religion, the revelation of the way of the higher evolution. This entails the bringing through of pure divine will and the relating of the spiritual hierarchy to the great council at Shambhala. It will be apparent to you, therefore, that he was the first to carry through from stage to stage the complete revelation of humanity to the hierarchy and of the hierarchy to Shambhala. This he did by virtue of a completely finished and constructed Antakarana, and thus he facilitated the work of all future aspirants and disciples. He made possible their unimpeded progress as far as the opening of each stage of the planetary Antakarana is concerned. He presented the first thread of living substance, irradiated by love, intelligently woven and energized by will, which any human being of our earth humanity had interwoven with the planetary Antakarana. Here lies the secret of the sixth initiation, which has not yet received the attention of the occultist. It is that of the ascension. Here comes a climaxing note. The whole evolutionary scheme is based upon a series of ascensions. These ascensions are the result of a process, a technique, a method, choose which word you will, of invocation by the lesser individual, group, or kingdom, and the evocation of that which is greater, more inclusive, and more enlightened. This is true whether it concerns a lonely aspirant upon the way or an entire kingdom in nature. The greatest of the incarnating sons of God are necessarily those who can include whole kingdoms or states of divine being in their consciousness. Here is the key as to why the invocation by a group standing with massed intent can bring forth, and has done so many times in our planetary history, one who could meet the need which the invocation voiced upon a way of escape and embody in himself the required vision or goal. You will note here that I have carried the teaching earlier given upon the subject into the realm of the whole. Previously, I dealt with the process as it applied to the disciple invoking his soul. Later, I carried the concept farther, and we considered the disciple invoking his Father in heaven, the monad. Now we have briefly touched upon humanity as a whole, standing at a great point of invocation wherein the entire human kingdom is involved. Thus, you have the final three of the six great stages in the process we are considering: invocation, leading to evocation, to revelation at the fifth initiation, and to decision at the sixth. To sum up, we have carried our study of the esoteric aspects of mental unfoldment to a point where we have lifted the entire spiritual man into realms which are neither those of the soul nor of the personality. They are those which make him an integral part of the monadic experience. We are therefore dealing definitely with initiate experience. That the personality remains as an instrument or vehicle of expression for the one universal soul in its many personality aspects upon the physical plane has been duly emphasized. That the soul per se has been lost to consciousness in the sea of universal realization has also been made clear. That the state of being which the initiate has now reached as a result of the 6 stages of conscious building of the Antakarana has been detailed. But I have pointed out in this connection that what has transpired lies beyond what we call consciousness, and is consequently undefinable by the human intellect. We have dealt with certain high stages of unfoldment which remain impossible to any human comprehension outside that of those who can function in the courts of Shambhala. When these stages have been passed, then the goal of all the evolutionary processes has been reached as far as humanity is concerned. These concepts cover our presentation of truth and of our theme up to the present point. Further we cannot go, for it would be profitless, nor would the human constitution prove adequate to the imposed task. I have in these previous sections carried our theme to the point where it climaxes all that has been hitherto given out anent the human mind and its capabilities. I have indicated the method whereby the mind, trained in meditation and therefore soul conscious, can, through the construction of the Antakarana, reach heights and stages of inclusiveness which will introduce to it certain aspects of the so-called universal mind, the mind of God, as it is familiarly called. What I have really done is to deal very briefly with the mode whereby the disciple or the initiate can, with increasing power, tune in on the mind of the planetary logos, Sanat Kumara. Just as the disciple can, when soul conscious, tune in on the mind of his master, so the initiate, upon a higher turn of the spiral, can register the thoughts of the divine being in whom we all live and move and have our being. Through the development of the Antakarana and its conscious scientific use, the initiate becomes aware of what transpires in the council chamber of Shambhala. He can then efficiently begin to work as an exponent of the will aspect of divinity. Yet all this time we have confined ourselves entirely to the consideration of the mind aspect in its three phases upon the mental plane, and with their extension into states of being unknown to all except trained disciples and initiates. It has been my intention thus to give a theoretical, though not yet practical insight into modes of activity and possible states of being to which you can someday aspire and eventually attain.